Everybody. I'm very happy that you could be here again for another boundary meeting for our committee members. Thank you again for your continued commitment and showing up at these meetings. We know how difficult it is for you. You are parents, you're community members, and you come to these meetings each night full of energy, full of ideas, and you get involved deeply in the work. I am Adrian Talley, Superintendent of Indian Prairie, and we are going to continue our meetings tonight. To those of you who are watching the meetings, thank you for being here. It's our first big live audience. Our meetings are recorded and have been since the very beginning to be as transparent as possible. I want to just say a few things. I have said this before to those who have been here in the meetings. Every night that we meet, we are reviewing concepts that I have referred to as barely etched in jello. These concepts are an opportunity for us to look at what is possible, not what will happen, but what is possible. None of them have been created into proposals. None of them are final. It is always a work in progress. And if you have been with us from the beginning, you will have noticed that these concepts continually change. And as I have said in many email responses, we review them, revise them, and recalibrate them at each of these meetings. The last meeting we had, there was something shown, and at the meeting, it was about Welch going to another school. And Bob, who is here from RSP, mentioned to me that night, if I had one more day, I would have made something different. And he said that because it is an iterative process. It continues to grow. And we come to these meetings with incomplete concepts that we continue to revise. I know Rob said that to me. I think he also said it to Mark, rising from the board, and he'll talk about that as well. So I want everyone to understand nothing is finished in these meetings. We will have a community forums will be held in November when maps will be shown with closer to the end, but not the end. Parents, community will be able to talk about these concepts that are shown, provide feedback, and then that feedback is taken and put into final proposals that are given to the board. And then the board will hold meetings, as we always do, where public comment may be given. Just want everyone to understand the process. And we started this back in late April, and we'll continue through December. So we're not done. We have a few more meetings to have as we go through this process. So Rob, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you. Good evening, and I'm so glad we have the ability to further educate more people in the community about this process. So this is great that more people have started to get engaged in this. So thank you for coming this evening. As every meeting, and I'll spend a little more time, really more to the demise of the committee members on how we got where we are here today. But as every meeting, we have some different things that we have to go over just to right set us, to make sure we're on the same page as where the board set us out. We do have some goals that we try to get through in each of these meetings. And like the last two meetings, there's going to be more conversation at your tables to dive in a little more into these options, to reflect more on what we're seeing and how they relate to the guiding principles and the boundary criteria. For those committee members if you get your cell phones out, go ahead and type in that number that you're aware of. You should already have it defaulted there. A little bit about the process. So Dr. Talley was mentioning it's a process. So here we are at meeting number 6, September 22nd. We will have a pause until October 27th for some of the things that were built into this process, because we knew that we would need to look at things maybe a little bit differently, maybe a little more in greater detail related to the enrollments. On October 1st, we have the official fall housing count. That's the data that every school district uploads to the state. That will be refreshed in our analysis. I think in the committee information that went out, we're down about 400 students from last year. So that's a factor in how we're seeing what change maybe happens in various parts of your district. The other thing that's built into this process is when we come back October 27th, that's where we get really prepared as a committee for what will go to the 3 public inputs that will be held on November 8th, 9th, and 10th, one in each of the high schools. And this will be, as Dr. Talley mentioned, a lot of stuff put out specifically on the website, some media blitzes to put things out. We want everybody that comes to each of those meetings on those nights to be aware of what each of whatever those concepts look like, what details are into that. So that's the process. Then when we come back from those public inputs, we have another committee meeting here in December with the idea that we're ready to give some recommendation to the Board of Education in December, and then final adoption in January. One thing that is also important, since we have a good listening crowd, is our committee, we're not responsible for grandfathering or student options. So that should come from administration, and something then the board would approve if that was going to happen. So that's the process. Again, there's data that you can see what each entity does and what they're responsible for. One thing that's also important in this process is we've wrapped around this ACE concept. So we know there's different things happening in those buildings related to academics. We know there's different cultures. We know that there's buy-in to each of these buildings with traditions and history and just all the things that are wonderful about why your community supports each school. We see that for sure tonight. We'll see this in the public inputs and when the board finally makes their approval. The E, the economics, comes into play because there are certain realities of what we can do. Some of that we've been talking about with how we look at capacity. If you go back 4 weeks ago, we started the conversation of, hey, can we reintroduce what capacity looks like with innovative spaces, STEAM spaces, other spaces in those buildings that would change what the capacity is for underutilized buildings, but even up in the north, buildings that are overutilized. This starts to get into some of the economic reality. What can we do? What are those costs? The board did give us some guiding principles, and each of our concepts, we always go back to those guiding principles. I'm not going to read each 5 of these guiding principles, but the committee members, you're aware, this is how we're trying to evaluate one aspect of anything that we're working toward in our recommendation to the board. We did have boundary criteria. We did it several different ways with the board as they tried to understand what all of these criteria might mean. And again, we're metricing each of our concepts back to these boundary criteria. So the top was demographic considerations, and that's why we have all these tables with different things on how you, depending what lens you're coming from, how do you want to evaluate? Is it getting better or worse based on the current situation from a housing standpoint, ethnicity standpoint, free and reduced lunch? So again, we try to give you a lot of good data for that. The second criteria was neighborhoods intact, and that got into how RSP breaks the district down to different types of developments. So is it single family, multifamily, townhomes? How are those neighborhoods being moved through the process of being assigned an elementary building, a middle school building, and a high school building? Our third criteria was really a tie with physical consideration capital, meaning try to minimize how many new dollars we spend in these buildings, and projected enrollment building utilization. So matching up our enrollment with the available space in each building, whether it's the elementary, middle school, or high school. So again, we had different things with prioritization. We have some different ground rules. With this being a committee meeting, the focus is the committee persons delving in, and we'll be trying to provide some conversation between them and myself as we facilitate through this. There will be periods of time in some of our meetings as committee members, as you are aware, where we have you provide your feedback of what is it that you've learned tonight and so on. I've been talking about consensus. We're not yet quite ready to move into what consensus will mean for these concepts. I have this in here because at some point the board has asked us to deliver some recommendation to them. What that recommendation is going to get into how we as a group can move through and come to consensus. There's a lot more information in many of the other presentations about the current enrollment situation, some of the new developments, whether they're infill developments, or I think Saw Ridge down on the south side in Bolingbrook. All that information is contained in these presentations. Tonight I've kind of just kept a few of the things in here so that people that are listening to this know that we're looking at a lot of different data sets, live birth data, student data, information from the city, looking at how all those planning areas change over time. They're not always going to decrease. They're not always going to increase. This map shows what a 5-year change has happened in each of those planning areas. We also know where the students are, so this helps us understand as we make some of the changes to meet those guiding principles and boundary criteria, how many kids are really there. We've created growth areas to understand, and this gets updated each year that we do the enrollment analysis. Development activity, all of this, again, as we look at what's happening and what could happen in some of these areas. Different perspectives of that analysis by the cities. All of our presentations also have information that helps build the story. How did we get here on September 22nd, going back since this is meeting 6? So you're going to see some of the themes that we have heard from different things. We've had parking lot questions, history of the boundary changes, recap of each of the meetings. So again, everything is moving along. It's organic. It's a journey to try to get us toward something that's going to be meeting the board guiding principles and the boundary criteria. So you can see all of this as we move through. So this is where I wanted to take a moment. This starts to get us into some of the newer information that we're going to talk about tonight. So some things that are important that's different from the current map that you would look at, whether it's the elementary, the middle school, or the high school. We have new growth areas that are not assigned an attendance area. So part of our goal with this group is we're assigning these new growth areas an attendance boundary. We also know that there's currently overutilization areas. You can see each of the buildings at each level that we've listed that we either currently have a situation or we may have over the next 5 years. And we also have underutilization. And again, this is all tied back to how those buildings are programmed. We've also talked about some other committee requests, and I kind of labeled it that, like maintaining neighborhood connectivity. What does that mean? And it's different depending on what neighborhood you live in. We ideally want to create a complete middle school to high school feeder. Right now it's broken, and the idea is that the middle school completely feeds to one of the 3 high schools. We also talked about assigning growth areas to Waubonsee Valley. And again, that's something that's kind of been a concept that we've been trying to put in each of the concepts that we've been creating. So some of the reality checks. We know there's more students on the north side of the district than we have buildings. And we know the south side has more buildings than they have students. So we have a lot more capacity. We also have a goal that we want to reduce the number of islands that are being moved to different buildings. That in itself has some inefficiencies with transportation, a lack of neighborhood connectivity. So really wanting to reduce those islands. I also had our team put together just to give you the concept of some of our challenges are where the buildings are located. So if we were really trying to make like an east-west split between the schools, we know that 5 of the 7 middle schools are on the west side of 59, and 2 of the 3 high schools are on the west side of 59. So when we start to break down where these students are, where the buildings are, and trying to keep things where if you're next to a building at whatever level, we're going to have some different challenges that as a group, can we achieve a complete middle school to high school with where these buildings are at? Another deeper thought into this is when you look at a district such as 204, where we are seeing declining enrollment right now, the early returns are saying about 400 students fewer than we had last year. If these trends continue, as you start to look at the feeders that we're creating in these concepts, you're going to understand there are a certain number of elementary buildings that we need. There's a certain number of middle school buildings and high school buildings, and there may even be a point in the future where in Equal Valley, we actually have enough capacity where the freshman center is not needed to house freshman students. So these are things that are what normally would be in a facility master plan, but we've interjected into this process because we know there's some known outcomes that we have to try to plan for, so the district appropriately is allocating students to each of these buildings. We had a lot of discussion about capacity, specifically where when Dr. Talley was saying if I had another day to work on our option, well, we were working with administration on what would these new concepts look like with capacity changes. So as administration was looking through the buildings and identifying where could we strategically place some of our programs that we currently have, where can we add some of these innovative spaces, the capacity of the building changed. So just simply think about if you're an elementary building and you have 18 classrooms that can be for K-5 instruction, core instruction, and we take 1 or 2 of those spaces out, we have fewer capacity for students that would be in those core spaces, but we'd have these other innovative spaces that would be really good for the student experience. So that was what we were working on for Concept 3. That was the big difference between Concept 1 and Concept 3 and how it started leading us down the path a little bit differently than where we were with Concept 1 or Concept 2. And if you remember at our last meeting, we basically had no support, very minimal support for Concept 2 when we looked at it at the elementary level, the middle school level, high school level, or as an aggregate of all 3. There was much more support for how it related back to the guiding principles and the boundary criteria, which is why tonight we're talking about Concept 1 and then Concept 3. So we always had some starting points, and so this has not changed from the first time that we introduced Concept 1, but this generally starts to give you an idea of what was the basis of how did we look at something different than what the current situation is. We then have tried to provide what those areas are that change from where it currently is assigned to, again, give you that context of how these changes look. You see that on the map. There's a table on there where we show where it currently is and then where it gets assigned. So we show you the same thing at the middle school and the high school. And then I always come back to those guiding principles. So does it check off what the 5 guiding principles are? And then we've added in from Concept 1, those 3 check marks. Does Concept 1 complete the feedback from meeting number 3 where we didn't have subdivisions broken between schools, having May Watts more centralized? Because if you remember when we started out on Concept 1, we had a lot more of the island areas coming into May Watts and less around it. And then we wanted the Brookdale Elementary boundary more centralized. So again, as we looked at where enrollment was and how those things are changing, how are we meeting those components that you as a committee have asked us to try to evaluate and improve those concepts. We then have listed off the boundary criteria of how well it's meeting that. And so you can see with concept one, if we want to be less than 95%, we have two buildings that in at least one of the years they're right at 95%. So it may not be quite perfect. We try to give you, again, since there's so much data, we're trying to help you understand what this might mean as far as benefits or drawbacks. And again, there's more benefits and there's more drawbacks you can put on this as it may relate to how it may impact you personally. But this was generally trying to give an idea as it relates to things that we can provide metrics for. The same thing for concept 3. So again, the big starting point for concept 3 was the change in capacity of the buildings. And I think it's also important to note it wasn't just in the south where we have available space. It was throughout the district, whether you're on the north side or south side. Administration was saying we need to provide those type of spaces, whether it's a full building or a less than full building. And so that changed the capacities on nearly every elementary building, some of the middle schools, and a couple of the high schools. So that was kind of the baseline for that. I put this table back into the presentation for what I'm showing you tonight, just so that you can see what in option or concept 3, what the current capacity would be, and then what that new capacity is as we've changed what happens in that building with some of these innovative spaces. Again, we have some different fast facts about what Concept 3 changes are. One thing that we heard from the committee that we really tried to do in Concept 3 that's different from 2 weeks ago is to try to follow more of the current high school boundary. So that has Waubonsee staying more south towards 103rd Street. You're going to see this on the maps, and you're going to see some of the challenges that we have, specifically for the middle school. And as we started to look at things from what I left you with 2 weeks ago, saying, hey, let's try to create Concept 3, where if you are adjacent to the building, you can go to that building, and it would not matter what level you are at. So looking at it from the elementary, the middle school, and the high school. And so you'll see some changes that happen with Concept 3 to try to get at that point. Again, you'll see the areas that have changed, the elementary school, the middle school, and we didn't make any changes at the elementary for Concept 3. We really focused more on the middle school and the high school because that was where we had the greatest challenges of schools that would be, or neighborhoods adjacent to schools but not going to those schools. And then as I go through this, again, I want to stress too, because we have a great audience, all of these changes were set in motion because of the things you as a committee saw in those. So nothing about any emails that have come through in the last few days or on this great attendance tonight. It literally was through our understanding of, as we looked at these concepts, what's going to be acceptable, what makes sense for the community, what gets beyond just saying something's a complete middle school to a high school look. So as we look at Concept 3 with the guiding principles, we're showing that we're able to meet all 5 of them. And then when you get into the boundary criteria, you can see that we couldn't have a complete middle school to high school feeder, and so we had to make a break. And it will make sense when you see it on a map because, again, as we push south with Waubonsee, we end up having challenges with basically school and middle school, and maybe a little bit with still middle school. So you'll see that on the maps. And that may be perfectly acceptable. It wasn't a goal the board gave us for having a complete feeder, but it is something that ultimately we like to try to do for the ease of students knowing where they go and the relationships that they build in middle school to continue on into high school. So again, you can see how we've tried to classify this with benefits and the drawbacks, very similar to what you see in Concept 1. what you've seen with any of the other concepts we've presented. All right, so I passed out at your tables for your handouts a way that we can start to really just focus on a few things. And I'm going to try to time this where we get through these 4 activities in about 15 minutes. And we're going to then have the maps like what we've been doing at each of these meetings. And you'll start to look at the maps. But the first thing I wanted you to focus on is the feeders. So I believe on one of the handouts you have, it shows the current feeder. And the dotted lines represent where we have broken feeders. So in the case of, like, if I look at Owen, is the first building that has a dotted line from the elementary. We have 2 dotted lines that go to Hill and Still Middle School. So it's broken between 2 middle schools. When we look over from the middle school to the high school, you can see we have a lot of dotted lines where there's breaks from the middle school to the high school. So a middle school will feed into 2 high schools. So again, that's the current situation. When we look at concept 1, what you really see here is we get down to only 3 elementaries being broken into the middle school, and we have a complete middle school to high school. So visually, this looks pretty amazing. But does it look so amazing on the map? That's going to be the question later when we break it out, right? Then when we get to concept 3, it's just hard to have the elementaries completely feed into the middle school. So we have more breaks from elementary to middle school. So again, just trying to get you to see as we start to move some of these pieces around to try to establish some of the things that may make sense with where students reside and where the buildings are and what the capacities are of these buildings, and ensuring that we don't disrupt some of the demographics that are happening in these buildings. We have a lot of breaks. We've removed all the islands, and you'll see that on the map. So there are some redeeming things in here. But then we still have a break from middle school to high school. And you see that with Still and with Skolin, as I mentioned earlier. So I want you to take a few minutes at your table, take about 2 minutes, and flip between, here's what it currently is, then here's what concept 1 is, here's concept 3, and then I have on there, like, circle what is the most preferred. And just right now, as you just look at this, what's the most preferred? And like every meeting, I'm not honing you in to say, for concept 1, wow, this looks really nice. But let's just see where you guys are at just looking on paper. And we will collect all these papers when it's time to end the meeting. Page 5 is where you circle it. All right, I'll bring you back. So circle, I believe it's page 5. Which of the two concepts is the most preferred feeder as you look at this? And then I want you to do your cell phone. I want to see now what you have. I want to kind of have an instantaneous look of what you guys are thinking. All right, make sure you pick your phones up. I want to count this down. I have about 24 responses. As always, this is just so everyone as a committee, you can see where are we leading ourselves. So I'm going to do a countdown of 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So right now, majority at concept 1. Okay, so now your second activity is to focus on the socioeconomic factors. And so what I want to tell you here is this is probably one area that's changed the most from the last meeting. And so we've been working with the district on some of the data sets to understand free and reduced lunch and how it's coming from a different database. And so we're using right now, if everyone could please be quiet that's out in the back so the committee can do their work. All right, thank you. So one of the things that we changed was updated student information out of the data that the district has for free and reduced lunch. And so these numbers are going to be different than any other meeting just because of the way we were able to finally pull the data and get it to work a little bit more in line with what we're seeing for free and reduced lunch. So look through, again, the 3 categories. We have IEP, so the individual education plan. We have ELL, which is English language learners. And then the FRL is the free and reduced lunch. And you're going to see that here with Concept 1, you'll see it for the elementary, the middle school, the high school, and the same thing with Concept 3. So go ahead and study those things, and then I think there's a place for you to circle which one do you feel gets a little bit better. And I also want to point something else out that will happen in the next October meeting. Dr. Talley and I, we talked about this the other day when it became apparent that we wanted to have better free and reduced lunch data. And sometimes the raw numbers may not fully represent what the impact is in that building. And so we're going to show some things by percentage when we get to the last October meeting. We didn't have time to put that together and accurately tell you, hey, with these type of students and the metric moved, let's say 2%, well, 2% may be pretty impactful on how the space is used. So again, just keep that in mind. These are things that are changing. I have a couple questions. I'll kind of walk out there and we'll see what they are. I'll help your discussion. Yeah, so here was the question, is our goal to have it as close as it is today? Let's table how I answer that for October, because there may be some buildings where we look at the number of kids and it fits the program, but maybe as we make the change, does the program still have the right space, or now did we move kids to another place? So I can't quite answer that, but it may be in the case of free and reduced lunch, I would look at this as, is there a way that we've maybe better balanced it for that? For ELL and IEPs, those I would say it may depend on what those students are receiving and can they still receive that service where they are then assigned with the concept.
identify the schools that are like Title One, because those are schools that typically have more of the.
Yeah, so one thing that I'll do for October is we'll identify the Title I schools. I believe we have 5 buildings, if I'm correct. There's 4 now, and there's 5. I'm going to come back here, see what this question, she's probably losing strength in your arm.
My question is, the changes affect at all any of the Title I potential?
All right, so her question again gets in line with, do any of the changes in concept 1 or 3 impact whether a building could be slated as a Title I building or unslated? So flipping one way or the other. That's something that we'll have pulled out officially in October as well. But good questions, because that does change where resources get allocated and the services that students may have access to at a more readily fashion. So I'll give you again about another 2 minutes, and then you circle the one that you feel based on what you generally know now. And we know there's going to be more stuff that we're going to give you so you can better understand and answer that question.
On this one, we were talking about concept one, what is the like one and different levels, but not okay, that's what I'm talking about. That's what we kind of talked about last week. Okay. I know the overall
So again, since I had a couple questions from committee members, you're not locked in. If you like, you're circling concept 1 and then you like parts of concept 3 or parts of concept 1, when we get into the map discussion, that's going to come out. So again, you're not locked in. We just want to kind of know what you're thinking at this particular moment. We'll evaluate that at the end as well. Another thing that I wanted to bring out that I know I didn't state. So in concept 1, we have 2 buildings being repurposed. And I think that's important since we have a good audience here to understand that there was no specific metrics to say, hey, in this case, Chloe and Graham would be going offline as core K-5 buildings. It was a illustrative purpose to say if we have so much capacity in the South and not enough kids, and some of these buildings are at 40% or 50% utilization, is it a way to look at the South where we have less inventory dedicated to core instruction? So that's kind of where concept 1, why it's those 2 buildings. It may be 2 altogether different buildings if this were the concept that moved forward. So again, I thought that was important as I saw that. All right, so if I can get you back up here with your phones. So for the socioeconomic factors, which one are you leaning toward as you look at the socioeconomics?
There might be like as far as like the 2 classrooms. That's all that might be. It could be like in the field. There's generally things where the programs are. For sure.
All right, I got 29. I'm going to do a countdown of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This one's probably more split because we have a few questions that I think if I'm telling you, hey, it does this, and you're like, wow, I really like that's going to be a good thing for teachers or a good thing for kids, that probably sways you one way or the other. All right, that was at the elementary level. If we talk about this at the middle school level, oh yeah, probably didn't voice that loud enough. Now we're at the middle school. Okay, which one looks better? Middle school. All right, I'm going to do the countdown of 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And the last question on this is going to be at the high school level for socioeconomics. All right, I'm going to do a countdown of 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, so now when you look at those tables, we're focusing on the housing. So again, you can see where by each building, the number of units, the number of students that are in that type of development, whether it's single-family attached, single-family detached, or apartments. And then you can see with the concepts where it changes. So if the area is highlighted in green, is like what we see on Bilta with the apartment units, that means it had an increase of 10% more from what the current boundary is. If we look at the area that's highlighted in red, there's a 10% decrease. So one's increasing, one's decreasing. So again, I'm just trying to highlight where we see the most amount of change when you look at where it currently is, and as you make changes, how does that relate to what you see? And you'll see that at the elementary, you'll see it at the middle school level, and the high school level for concept 1. Same thing for concept 3. We even suggest what's happening with the current situation and what happens in concept 3 with the feeder. So again, have a couple minutes and we'll have the same 3 questions as we talk about it at the elementary level, middle school level, high school level.
So is there a way maybe you can just tell us which one?
All right, so it's looking like the print copies you guys have at your table, we're not showing the red and green cells. So generally, the areas that we saw a red, where there was a decrease of 10%, you can look up here on the board up here, but generally we're seeing areas in Collishaw, Gomberts, Georgetown, Longwood, May Watts, Owens, Steck, White Eagle, and Young have some sort of increase in one of those three sectors. I don't know how much, do you guys want me just to list it off that way? Is that helpful for you guys, or you just want to, because you can maybe visually, if you have your bifocals out, particularly on the elementary, that's pretty bad. That's the problem when you have this many elementary buildings. In middle school, it's a little bit easier. We have Fisher, Granger, and Hill that have some areas where we had more than 10% decrease. That's concept one. And then for the high school, Wabunsee, for single family detached. All right, I'm going to pull you into the voting to see where you guys are at. So for, as it relates to housing distribution at the elementary level, and I'm going to do the countdown of 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay, if we go to the middle school, and I'm going to do the countdown of 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Pretty split. At the high school level, all right, I'm going to do the countdown of 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, the last exercise that we have through these tables, SIBC, so students that are impacted by a boundary change. So this is all going to get updated when we have this year's student data. So this is looking at last year's student data, and as you change the boundary for each of the concepts, who are the kids based on where they reside that would be changing boundaries? So as we go across, if we look at Brookdale, there's we come all the way across, there's 49 that would go to Longwood. So you can see how that works as you go for the rows. If you go down the columns, you can see where kids are moving around as well. And so in this case, for a total number of kids, a little over 2,100 kids at the elementary level are impacted by the boundary change. This is the impact of removing islands, right? So as we start to remove islands and try to create compact areas, we're going to have a lot of impacts. The schools that have had these islands and we start to remove the islands and put them around a building, that changes. You see the same thing at concept 1 for the middle school. We have about 440 students that are impacted? Yeah, what this would be is the way we explain this is, if I'm looking here at the high school, this would be 8th through 11th graders that would be assigned that they currently would have gone to one of the 3 high schools, and then they change going into 9th through 12th. So again, trying to go one year back because we know that they're going to be impacted. They were thinking they would go to one high school, and if that area changed, who's impacted? Same thing when we look at the middle school. We're trying to look at those 5th through 7th graders for the year in which the change takes place, if it takes place next year, that you can see what that impact is. Some of this is actually maybe even minimized because some students are not going to the building where they reside, right? We've showed you that when we came out with our projections. So some kids may actually now be going to the building they're attending based on the transfer or where the program is. Another thing to factor in the SIBC is that if a student is receiving an IEP and they're supposed to go to Matea, then they would need to go to Matea even if the boundary changed. So there are some nuances where there's some kids that will not be impacted, and for the reasons that are related to the education or to the district policies. So we get to concept 3, there's about 1,500 students that are impacted. So we go back here, we were over 2,100 in concept 1. Concept 3, we're at 1,500. Concept 3, we have about 570. If you go back to concept 1, it was 444. So more kids are impacted in concept 3 at the middle school. And if we go to the high school, there's about 690 students impacted in concept 3, and there's over 1,100 in concept 1. Question? No, when we look at the middle school, we would say it would be the current 5th graders, the 6th graders that are there, the 7th graders that are there for the boundary change next year. They would be the ones that would be in this SIBC. Now, I don't want to discount that if, let's say, you're a 4th grader, you potentially are impacted as well, right? But we're looking at the most immediate when you go, and once you're in that system, that's the system you go to with the change. So obviously there's other kids in a family that would be impacted further on down. Good question. Middle school? Another question?
When you ask to circle the concept at best exhibits, the SABC rate aligns with boundary criteria. I mean, if the boundary criteria that we're using is to eliminate islands, then we want this number to be maybe high. If the boundary criteria is about removing, those broken feeders, then we might want that criteria to be different. So what criteria are we using?
So the question she has is with the SIBC, if we're removing islands, we know that number is going to be greater. But in the boundary criteria, we're trying to minimize the number of students that are impacted. So the way you would look at this is kind of your lens as you look at SIBC. You may say the one that impacts the most, I think that's the best SIBC because it's going to address some of the other things that I'm concerned with, you as a person, as it relates to the guiding principles and the boundary criteria. I'm isolating it just so that we all understand, again, as we look at all these and we see all the maps and we're like, oh my gosh, what is this? So good question. I think there's another one back here.
We're confused with this number here. Is this the total number of, what is that number? What is this number representing? So If it's the total residing students, we know it's number one is 344 students. What is this referencing? I got you, but then they have no change. Why is it so low?
Okay, so this is, the residing number is going to be like K4 students, because when we're isolating K4 students this year for the change going into first through fifth. We don't yet know the kindergarten students that would be like here this year from last year's data, because until they register, but that's a good question. So it's focusing K4 enrollment to what the K4 change is. That's why all those numbers at the elementary, all the buildings should be less.
How do the developments that haven't been built factor in these numbers? So it's like we talk about the Fox Valley apartments, and then are those people kind of impacted or not impacted since they don't exist yet?
Yeah, so right now, those students are not in the system living in those places that are yet to be built, so there is no SIBC for them. And in fact, if you implemented this boundary next year, they would have no impact, right? Because they move in if the building opens up. But good question to clarify. All right, I'm going to take you back to the questions, 3 questions. So at the elementary, SIBC. Okay, I'm going to do the countdown. Let these people come to their phones if they quick. Put your A or B in. All right, I'm going to do the countdown of 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay, same thing for the middle schools. Okay, I'm going to count down to 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Then for the high school. And I'll do the countdown of 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, now to the maps. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pass these maps out. It's going to be the same that we did at the last meeting. I'm going to have elementaries in the first 3 tables. Middle school will be in the second tables, and high school in the back 3 tables. What's going to be different is you're going to get a current map, you're going to get concept 1 map, and concept 3. So these first 3 tables will be elementary, the second 3 tables will be the middle school, the last 3 tables will be the high school, then we'll rotate through so you can see the elementary, the middle school, and high school. I've changed this up because I wanted you to literally be focusing on, if I'm at the elementary table, what is it currently? And then what do these 2 concepts, you can visually see this because I isolated you with the data, but now as you look at these maps, what really is going to make sense as you drive through the community and you think about your neighbors, your friends, all of those things, which one is aligning up toward, again, our guiding principles, our boundary criteria, but then starts to take into account this ACE factor in this. So we're going to pass this out and let you guys get to work. All right, take the next minute or so. Remember, you can write on these maps. Write on the maps, and we're going to rotate around just like we did. Stay in your column. And the high school comes up to the elementary to the middle school to the high school.
I just want to remind people we are not taking pictures of the maps. These maps are working documents. We have not posted them on our website because of that. We will have maps available when we meet at the community forums in November. Thank you.
All right, time to make your next rotation, please. That way you'll be having gone to each series of maps. All right, now what I'd like for you to do is what we did last 2 weeks ago. Let's bring in your column, bring everything together where the top row is the elementary, the middle row is the middle school, and the high school, and then match it up where you have the currents all in line, elementary, middle school, high school. Same thing with the middle school, currents, concept 1, concept 3. All right, I'm going to give you about a minute. Just kind of look at this. Talk with the people that are surrounding you. What you're thinking. I heard things, and I'll just kind of spew a few things I heard. Concept 3 may have looked good when I looked at the visual that we went through of how the feeders line up. But the way I see it on the map, I may not like it. There may be parts of concept 1 that you like at one level, but parts of concept 3 are better. These are the type of observations when we do our report out here in about a minute that I want to hear from you.
things are already changing. They're going to be 55 and older.
Oh, really?
Yeah, seniors. It's actually going to get better. So yeah, for sure.
All right, so I'm going to now open this up. We'll do one comment from one grouping of three, and I'll rotate to another group. Another comment. We'll kind of go through till we exacerbate what your thoughts are. So if everyone can be quiet, we're gonna start this out. Oh, I thought you were doing it. That was funny. Seriously, you're like this. Oh, all right. So someone at this table, this grouping, who wants to say something on your observation of what you're seeing visually here? They'll start to be quiet as we talk. Who wants the mic?
I think that one thing I notice is that it's hard to really see the economic impact of the decisions that are being made here and thinking about how they're going to affect all kids in the district and not just your own kids, but the equity impact, as especially at the high school as we start to shift neighborhoods that are very wealthy neighborhoods and move them around. I start to worry about how different schools will be impacted. And the more that we in the elementary level are looking at kind of neighborhood attendance and keeping communities together, it reminds me of why I hope that we are not going to get rid of schools, because those neighborhood schools are important community builders. So those are some things I'm thinking about.
Good comment. As I rotate over here, I also want you guys to know we could apply the innovation spaces that are in concept 3 to concept 1. That's something we can talk about, right? We've kind of kept them isolated. But with what she said, that may be a possibility for both of these. Over here, who wants to talk?
I think we're still thinking.
Keep thinking, I'll come back. All right.
Something that we can see when we put it all together in this group is the things that we didn't like in concept 3 elementary school are better in concept 1, just as far as the markings, the things that didn't feel good with the flow. So just looking at that piece, 1 solves the things that we were concerned about.
Except for that little thing.
And there's just too many kids in that area. All right, over here, who wants to be our speaker?
So just what I noticed is if we look at concept 3 versus our current model, which is a working model, we have less impact. Less families will be impacted based on the data I saw. So less kids will be impacted by the changes versus concept 1. And the other thing is we would not split subdivisions, which I noticed in concept 1. And also a safety issue, we would not necessarily have them cross Route 59 if it's not necessary.
Okay, I'm coming back over to this. Over here, who wants to now speak?
I think concept 1 addresses some of the issues. I mean, the elementary schools, I think, are much better designed there. I do think from a high, I mean, one problem with concept 3, which we kind of made a note even last time, was the number of broken feeders. And for some schools, I think, the kids are split right from elementary, so they go, they make friends, they are split at the elementary level, they make friends in middle school, they are split again when they go to the high school. So the number of broken feeders in concept 3 kind of does not make it very conducive for, what we're trying to build here. And I think the other thing is in concept 1, to the point that was made earlier too, if you can eliminate, can prevent the elimination of schools, I think it will be a great concept. Because you want those community schools because they're truly community feeders.
Great, good points. Over here again. Who's ready to speak? Going once. It's all right. You're afraid. There's other people watching.
I would just like, with option one, the repurposing of schools, if we could discuss more. I think there's some reluctance in closing the schools. Clearly, nobody wants their schools to close. But if there was more enticing or just options, just wondering what the buildings would be used for versus the one presentation that we had. Is there an option to brainstorm that would make more sense with the community?
Good. And I want to comment on that because this is partly why we have this bigger break between now and our next. So re-examining what's happening with all these enrollment trends, housing trends, but then really looking even in greater detail, can we do these things in these buildings? What are those costs? And I heard some other people saying, well, if you're going to put all of these new spaces, could you build a new building? Okay, if we already have capacity issues, you know where that answer goes, right? That's kind of the building's not in the right place, so we got to find a way to get the kids there. We got to find a way to maybe do something different, which is what you're hearing district administration try to do. Other comments over here?
So as frustrating as this has felt, this meeting, one of the things that we've all noticed is that both Concept 3 and Concept 1 are improvements on the current situation. And then one of the issues that kept coming up with Concept 3 that we saw was, I believe it was Owen, gets split numerous times, so we just felt like Concept 3 had a lot more splits than we remembered it having, both at the elementary and the high school level.
And that is correct. When we started shifting because of the philosophy being, if you're by a building, we want you to go to that building, that changed how everything just can work as nicely as it did visually 2 weeks ago. Good points, though. Anything else? Because if not, I'm going to have you get your clickers, and we're going to go through a few questions. I think I have 4 or 5. All right, we'll come over here.
One piece that I continue to struggle with a little bit specific to Concept 3 is that we've seen these innovation centers and self-contained classrooms and you know that 20-minute presentation on what these tech centers could be, and you know where fiscally does that come from? Where does that money come from? I think it sounds amazing, but you know that's a huge question that I haven't really heard answered yet.
And that, I believe, will come in October, where we can kind of talk through, hey, with this piece that creates the opportunity for this and this, but definitely is important to know if you're going to jump into something that says we're putting these innovation spaces in, we probably need to have an idea of a timeline, right? Not, is it 20 years, 10 years, 5 years? But good question.
From some of the conversations we've been having between the concepts, I think a lot of people like some of the boundary changes in 3, some of the boundary changes in 1. Not too many people like the concept of closing schools, but at the same time, there's some questions about repurposing classroom space. Where's that money going to come from? Is there a possibility of having another concept introduced that might combine the best of both concepts into yet a third concept that we could consider?
And that's what I'm hoping with what we've done here tonight. Is there something that's taking foot that we can say this and this? So it'll be a combination of what you circled on your table, and then if you get your cell phones, we have some more questions to go through. And we might So the first question that I put out here was that very question. We're going to take money off this conversation. We know there's a cost. We have to work through what that cost is. But in order to solve the underutilization issue, should the district repurpose schools or invest in some of these innovation spaces that changes the capacities in those buildings. And again, as I state this, and if I say something that makes you want to change your answer until I click to the next slide, you can change. When we put these innovation spaces in the buildings on the north, for instance, with Longwood, we have an addition, lights. We have an addition of like 4 classrooms, I think, that's in concept 3. But when we talk about providing some of those innovation spaces, you're really not picking up 4 core classrooms, right? There's inherently, if we make innovation spaces in all the buildings, the capacity in the north, where we don't have as much capacity availability, means those neighborhoods being served shrink in order to meet what that capacity is. So there is some good, there's good and bad in all of this, and so you just have to think about that. So I'm going to close this in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so again, this feeder, I always want to come back to this. We were saying we really want this complete middle school to high school feeder. So the question here, is it more important to have a complete middle to high school feeder or maintain current neighborhood high school boundaries? Because one thing that's, I'm trying to remember if it was on this concept, I think all of the elementaries end up going to the same high school in one of these concepts. So when you look at this, there's other ways to look at this, that maybe there's a break from elementary to middle school, but if you're in an existing elementary, you end up being in the same high school. So I can't remember which concept that was. It was something I was looking at when I was flying up here today. So I'm going to close this in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, the concept that best serves elementary students and staff is, and I debated before I put this question together of saying a combo, but I was like, I really want to know where you're sitting at each of these levels, so that's why we broke it down by level. And so if there's something that's overwhelming in one of the concepts and it's different in the middle school or the high school, we can kind of try to see how do we piece this together. That's amazing. Come on, get one more vote. Close this down. 5, 4, there we go. 3, 2, 1. Well, you know the math had to work because there was an odd number of participants. All right, so the concept that you least support to serve our elementary students and staff is? Different way of asking it. Sometimes it's how you word the question and what the responses are. In theory, it should be the same, right? All right, there's 31. Last time we had 33 responses, but I'm going to close this in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There we go, it was the same. Okay, the concept that best serves middle school students and staff is? You guys are evenly split again. This is great. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's looking like 2 options are coming to you. All right, so the concept I least support to serve our middle school students and staff is? That's amazing. And I'll do the countdown of 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, the high school level. The concept that best serves high school students and staff is? Amazing. 2 more people. I'm going to start the countdown at 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, so the concept I least support should flip, right? And I'm going to do the countdown. Again, there's 31, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so taking all of them. So this is the entire concept 1, concept 3. So you're split when we looked at this for the most part between elementary, middle school, high school. But if you take it as its whole, it's amazing. So we have 32, there was 33. I'm going to do the countdown of 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, so I want to know, has this meeting moved our conversation closer? Pretty much, if you're 50%, it's going to be no. But that, on theory, that may be the case. But there's things that you all have said, so as I talk, maybe this sways how you maybe answer this. So what I've learned is there's more information that we need for the socioeconomic status for the kids that are impacted specifically in some of these programs. So that's something clearly we will work on for the October meeting. The second thing that I've learned is because we can take this innovation with capacities and apply it from concept 3 back to concept 1, what we'll do is we'll show the capacities the same way in concept 1 so that we can see how things work out. Whether those 2 buildings come offline or they're online, I'll still show 2 buildings offline because you're going to know that in the South we can have those 2 buildings online and do all these innovation things. That is for sure. But at least want to give you an idea with how the boundaries are created. Can we still meet whatever that new capacity is? There was those 2 takeaways. Third is we're going to have new numbers for what the enrollments are. Fourth, we're going to try to take through some of the things that you have mentioned, specifically to feeders. And is there some different ways we can look at how this goes that maybe gets at more of what you're talking about specifically? As I went to different groups and you would say, well, this area doesn't make sense that we go by one middle school to get to the other middle school. So, or high school or elementary, whatever that might be. So we'll kind of focus on that. Again, I'm listing out the public inputs that are November 8th, 9th, and 10th. I forget what day do we meet in October? Is it the 27th? 27th, October 27th. And again, I mentioned these 3 bullet points already. We're just going to try to build things in to get it to the point where we're able to take it to the public for discussion. And what I want all of the committee members, what you guys understand, we're not going to have a perfect plan. Whatever we draw up that changes from where we are, you know it's going to create people that maybe don't like what the plan is. So part of the storyline that we're going to start putting together, why are we doing this? None of you came here to say, I want to disrupt students, I want to move staff around. We're trying to help the district solve a challenge they have with too many kids in some buildings, too few kids in other buildings. That's what our goal is, and we're trying to work that through in a way that makes sense, that's transparent, and that people can kind of follow how we get to the point when we get to those public inputs that this all makes sense. May not like it, but it kind of makes sense. That's all I have. Dr. Talley, is there anything more you want to say?
Thank you very much. I just want to clarify. A question was raised about transportation for students at an elementary school if children at the elementary school are having to cross a major road, but the road is less than a mile from the school. There are rules which we have to follow with transportation, but one of the most important is the safety of children. And so even if the children were close to a school and normally transportation wouldn't be provided, it would be if there's an issue with safety. We evaluate it, determine what's going on, and make that happen. We've been doing that before, and we'll continue to do that. So I just wanted to clarify that question. Yes, ma'am? There are rules that we look at, totally. Yeah, because someone asked about an elementary, but yes, we look at that. Next meeting, look forward to seeing all of you again. Remember, these concepts will change. So the pictures you may have taken will not be the same next time. So make sure you understand that going out. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you.